So as I pull off to a terrible start here, you can see that this is a bit different. This is new and exciting, as these are 1967 Grand Prix cars, the new cars to be added in the latest beta build of Automobilista. It's been the beta branch, not the full release yet, as we're here in Spielberg. The new Formula Vintage cars. So, these are finishing up their history of F1. We now have cars from 1960s to the present age. These are great, frankly. What you'd expect from a 60s Grand Prix car. Is it decent amount of power, quite lightweight, and very little grip. Some call it fun, some don't like it, it's personal preference. I obviously didn't like it in this corner as I just went straight off. Oh well. So the basics of what we have, as you see more or less the entire selection going in front of us. This was deliberate to show off all the cars, of course. So what they've added two cars, two cars. Right, they've added V12s and V8s. We're currently on board V12, which is my preferred one. Also slightly faster. I don't know. I didn't fully agree with how the V8 drove. It's because they drive differently, as you'd expect. V12 being the more powerful option, but being heavier. V8 being the lightweight option. So two ways of going at it. I would imagine that they are mostly down to personal preference. The AI hasn't fully mastered it, as you can see by this wreck up here. They're still quite slidey, but this is the beta, so these things are to be expected. Things to be ironed out. There are notable things that still have to be fully done. The AI need to be tuned out. They need to actually be given names, as you can see at the bottom right corner. They sort of lack that. But otherwise, pretty solid. So, two types of cars, V8s, V12s, and for the fun of it, these are not the only Formula Vintage cars, because you can add wings onto these if you want. With the invention of downforce, we'll have a look at them later. So as you can see, they're quite slidey, very oversteery, sort of as you'd expect. How they drive, I don't know, I would sort of describe them as sort of halfway between sort of the classic interpretation of old cars and sort of a more modern approach. The classic interpretation, as I call it, is very simply cars before 1980 are impossible to drive, they end. So they make cars that can't be driven by any human because, drivers back then were superhuman. They obviously didn't get the difference between bravery and driver skill. They think they've got a good balance here. These cars are not impossible to drive. They're tricky, as we see that guy in the dirt is proving. They're not easy by any stretch of the imagination. But they're sort of grounded, so it makes sense. It sort of brings us something that sort of doesn't slightly make sense for me anyway, sort of the feedback from it. Because generally in Automobilista the feedback is quite good. Force feedback will always be very much personal opinion. But I don't know, it seems slightly off with these cars. Because, say, compared to the most direct comparison I can make to another sim would be the Lotus 49 instead of Corsa. That'll be the comparison I could personally make, especially with the V8s here. Because if you look at the V8s, as this car here is making a good demonstration, that is a Lotus 49, right? You can phrase it any way you want, but that's a Lotus 49 in front of us, okay? But they drive differently. There's feedback. Maybe technically, physically, there's not much difference, but there's a difference in feedback. These cars don't feel as lively as you said, of course, version. And they don't feel as lively as, well, essentially they are, which is, I think, is part of the problem. Because these cars are moving around quite a bit, as you'd expect. They're very sensitive to inputs. You need a response that I don't think is quite there. Maybe it's the force feedback setting, maybe it's just me. Well, your mileage may vary, but that's just my initial take from it. I've gotten more, I've driven them, but I got more used to it, so it's not much of a problem. So I get what they're doing. I get what they're doing now. So yeah, so they drive as you expect. Ton of oversteer, and you have to be careful on the downshifting. Which brings the second thing out. My second remark on how they drive is that it all brings you back to basics. When you look up how to drive fast, learn how to drive fast, it's all about smooth balancing your input weight transfers. That's all what it's about. And you can sort of abuse modern cars with regard to this. They're much more forgiving. But these cars are not. They're not forgiving at all. You have to nail the inputs all the time to be fast in these cars. And you have to be quite good just to stay on track. As well, you've obviously seen so far, I'm not quite good. I'm just alright. Which is why I'm slow and I've already been off track once at least, and we've only been going for like 7 minutes. Which is, being what they are, they're so softly sprung. They're very sensitive. They're very similar to the Formula V, except they're the Formula V on steroids. It's got 400 horsepower, for fuck's sake, So if you need a car to challenge yourself and become a better driver, these are the cars. As I go off into the grass there. But yes, these are the cars to perfect your inputs. You'll be a much better driver at this. These are the cars where all the smooth as fast came from. Even if at times you have to interpretate smooth a bit to just stay on tracks. I'm surprised we haven't seen yet me braking and downshifting with the steering all over the place, trying to keep the thing some way straight. But yes, fun cars to try and master. Near impossible to race. Unless you're racing Alien. So at this point there, the 1967 versions of these cars. As you'd expect, nice tribute to Grand Prix legends. So let's see, let's advance 2 years into the future, right now. So, we advance 2 years into the future, and we also moved to Interlagos for a change of scenery. This time we are on board with the V8, which sounds surprisingly familiar, doesn't it? That's because it's the exact same engine as the Formula Retro. It's essentially the famous Cosworth V8 in all but name. It even says it on the description. This is the famous DFV engine. So, as I said before, two different types of cars in the Formula Vintage, the V12s and the V8s, which both drive differently. I know at first I didn't really click with the V8 initially. I clicked more with this version, because this version with the wings essentially gets rid of the oversteer. Put some understeer a little bit maybe, but that's the general fact that you're on 1960s tyres. So, as the AI is showing off, these cars have wings, so more grip and much more manageable cars. So, if you try the 1967 car and swear that you'll never touch an old car like this again after hitting the wall 20 times, try these cars. They're much more manageable. And actually quite nice. These would be the cars that I could see myself more racing, whereas 67 is just sort of for shits and giggles. Is a lot more stable. So ironically, you have to go to the more modern car to get your entry level into sort of this thing. Still fun, and not an easy car to race fast at all. Because racing fast is always taking advantage of what you got, and it's very hard to unlock the full potential of these cars. So they're a very nice addition to Automobilista, and they sort of put a bookend to the early access, really. Now I don't know if these will come out with, 1.0. Automobilista leaves early access with this update that'll be coming in the main branch. I don't know, frankly. But it would sort of be an end to one of the highlights of Automobilista, which is their F1 cars. Because there's no talk or plans of anything earlier. They can't go really more modern because they've covered themselves practically. Because now we've cars from the 1967 to 2014 season, and pretty well filled in between. We've 70s cars, we've 80 cars, we've 90 cars, we've 2000 cars, 2012, 2014. So what more do you want, really? And like that alone, that would be enough to sell a sim, but Automobilista has everything else as well. You got bazillions stock cars, you got touring cars, even some rallycross cars, you got some single cup cars, you got Formula V's, Formula 3's, and stadium super trucks. You got a bit of everything. Fortunately though, this is not the end. Maybe for the Grand Prix cars, but more cars are upcoming. The Rip Pack DLC will be out soon, TM, which will bring some track day and sports cars, which will be nice. There's been some other changes in this beta, mainly to do with the more or less the menus and how they work. When this hits main branch, I think multiplayer will begin to work properly, which would be nice. So I've been missing. There's some changes to the race settings, so you now have more control. There's no need to get messy editing series files to change some things up. Things like length of qualifying, how many race sessions a weekend, and things like that. So I'll have to fiddle with them a bit. Mad dive up there. And also loading screens have been changed a bit, so now have information on the car. Just little changes. This isn't throw everything out, but very much an improvement. So it's all looking good for the future of Automobilista. I would say the future is safe by going to the past, because these cars get a big thumbs up from me. Automobilista gets a big thumbs up. It's all good. So in the words of Marzin, I can't complain.